Hello and welcome to my podcast, Architecture of Change. I am your host, Leanne Mair, and I'm really happy because this is the third episode of the Power and Progress series. And last week, I talked about the hidden architecture of money, which is obviously a really important conversation, one that I definitely want to have again. But this week, we're moving into the dynamics of progress and pushback. And somehow I seem to land on P's. I think the first one was like power, progress, protect. And now we've added an extra P of pushback. And I think, the tagline almost of today's episode is the inevitable dance. And I think we've got to the point somehow in society that we have stopped thinking about the inevitability of pushback. It's kind of been framed more as a surprise, but when you think historically around pushback, it's challenged concentrated power structures, number one. But number two, the reason for the pushback is what we sometimes don't take enough time to consider, which is pushing back is against something. If you determine that progress or the lack of progress signals a lack of pushback, because you can't push back against air. And I think this is such an important conversation, especially within the context of where we sit right now, globally, politically. In my book, I reference general DEI pushback as a part of corporate strategy, which has obviously come to pass. Part of it was kind of, I would say, in terms of a provider perspective, part of it was a correction, but now we're going to the other extreme. And sometimes I think we're quite easy. It becomes quite easy to forget that a necessary part of progress requires pushback in order to challenge how we grow. Because part of it is, we can kind of think, and I think this is sometimes what can be very disconcerting or sometimes feels disheartening about progress. What are we sold about progress in general as a concept? We're continuously sold that progress is linear. What are you meant to do? You go upwards. But if I take the trajectories of women in, let's say, in careers, or the trajectories of a lot of women, Black women, and all women of color in careers, the trajectory for their careers is rarely this. It's rarely a line up. It's usually something along the lines of this. You go to the left to go to up, then you go to the right. Maybe I got my left and right back to front. Anyway, but the point I'm getting at, which is the path to success, the path to progress is rarely a linear one. And when we kind of face pushback, it can sometimes feel as though we've not made any progress because we've come up against this pushback. And I will make that even a personal case, right? When I think about the times when I've been upset about not making the career jump that I wanted to, it's felt like I've not made progress in a meaningful way. It's felt like I've not done the thing that I was meant to have done yet. And it's been packaged. And I think like later on, I want to discuss the different ways pushback is packaged, because I think that's another part of this. But looking at my own progress, and obviously this is not to be compared on a societal level, but the fact that it hasn't been linear is in many ways reflected in what we continue to see. And it's the fact that whether it's workplace challenges, whether it's general movements to counteract injustice, we need pushback. And when I say we need it, it's not because we want it. But we need pushback in order to face, well, not in order to face, but to help us grow. Because it's not going to happen. When you look at concentration of power, power is very rarely given. And as we continue to make progress, it challenges the concentration. It challenges the concentration. And I think sometimes when we're kind of planning, whether this is individually, organizationally, societally, our best case and our worst case scenarios don't necessarily include and embed that pushback is going to be a fundamental part of the process and its inevitability. There will not be progress without pushback, because pushback requires change. And I think although in our logical minds, we understand that there should be enough of the pie and that there's space for the pie to grow, right? Or that everyone can get a piece of the pie. The reality is that as the pie grows, the concentration of power still wants to keep owning more pieces of the pie, as opposed to sharing those pieces of the pie, because then it dilutes their power. And I had to come to grips with this whole concept myself of power and pushback. Progress and pushback, and the underlying power struggles that you face as you do that. And a lot of the times, when we're looking at the pushback, it's always built in a sense of, it's embedded in a way of almost gaslighting, right? It's embedded in a way that makes you challenge the validity of the progress that you've made. It makes you challenge the validity of the work that you've done thus far. How many people have asked themselves, and you can potentially ask yourself this question without needing to answer, but as in answer publicly underneath the live stream. But how many times have you asked yourself, have I just wasted my time? Is this a waste of time? Have I put all this effort in for nothing? I feel tired. Why am I still doing this? I think these questions come up more and more in those moments that we receive pushback, because the source of pushback is not only to stop what you're doing, it's also to fundamentally undermine your mindset in believing that what you're doing is right. Pushback is there to fundamentally undermine that what you are doing is right. So while we see kind of extreme cases, the louder cases of pushback all over the world in so many different quarters, whether it's within, philanthropic funding, whether it's within political parties and policies that are looking to repeal rights of women, rights of other minoritized and marginalized groups, whether it's how the promotions are looking within your organization, whether it's how your friends now decide to show up in your friendship group and the kinds of opinions that they now feel comfortable sharing. In so many ways, this pushback is it's sometimes subtle, because part of undermining progress is to make you believe that it's a waste. Pushback is not always going to be explosive. It's going to be subtle. It's going to be almost under the radar. It's almost going to be whispered, right? It's not always going to be shouted. It's not always going to be easy to detect. And, career pushback looks like, right now. And when I say career pushback, I mean both financially and from a career perspective, your trajectory. Right now, we just don't have the budget to give you that, that extra money that you've already worked for. Right now, it's not so clear that you're displaying those characteristics that we require in somebody at XYZ level. I'm not sure that us making this decision when it comes to diversity really makes that much sense, because we are excluding XYZ. How do we really ensure that this is fair? Aren't you doing this because you belong to this group? This is a challenge to our values as a society, and so on and so forth. It continues to excessively undermine the good fight, the necessary fight of equality, equity, recognition, being valued, in order to maintain power, not the illusion of power, the concentration of power. And I think sometimes that's the hardest thing to get to grips with, is that we continually see the pushback, which, to be perfectly honest, is infuriating. And I like the way I say infuriating in a very, very calm tone, but it is infuriating. It's infuriating to see pushback. It's infuriating to see organizational responses. It's infuriating to see budget reallocations. It's infuriating to see we no longer feel it's right to cater to women within our organization exclusively. And it's not, once again, a lot of the times these conversations have been framed in a way that have never given space to real conversations. And all of that's infuriating to see. But it doesn't mean that it stopped the real progress. Because as long as we continue not just to have conversations, but continue to be strategic, continue to push forward in ways that are meaningful. And I know I talked about this, and I think I talk about this in every episode, but it's looking at things from the individual, collective, organizational, societal level. Progress can never be stopped. Progress can never be stopped. And it doesn't always feel like that. It genuinely doesn't always feel like that. Sometimes it really does feel like progress can be stopped. Sometimes it really does feel like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And is it really worth it? And the answer is yes, it is worth it. It's always worth it. But when we start to bake in the inevitability of the dance of pushback, questioning, it should hopefully add a component of being so resolute and being so clear on your values and being almost immovable in a positive way, that helps you to recognize the function of pushback. Once again, it is to undermine the belief in the value of what you're doing, the credibility of what you're doing. But if you're resolute in your values and you understand that the pushback is coming and you understand why it has to come, because it's challenging power concentration, that resoluteness right there can be something that will really help you to kind of not feel as desolate, to not feel as disheartened, to not feel as bereft that your efforts have been in vain, and that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We just don't know how long the tunnel is. Because on an individual level, I don't know where I originally heard this, and I know I've like requoted it, probably also misquoted it a lot, but this part about you're always a role model to somebody. You might not realize who's watching, and someone's always watching you, whether you believe it, like it, or not. Someone's always watching, and someone's always, there's always going to be people to criticize, but there's also going to be people to praise you. There's going to be people that feel inspired by you. And I think this is the part of in our individual quests to make progress, to make change, to make, and this sounds very fantastical in a way, but make the world a better place, right? It's starting with ourselves. And also being brave enough to have those conversations, and being brave enough to have those conversations in the guise of like, what does pushback look like? What does it look like? How does it affect me? And not only that, but as I become more proximate to power, how do I then negotiate the pushback when the chances are the closer I come, the more pushback I'm going to encounter when trying to make change? Because this is also the other diorama that I think a lot of people face, is that as you make more progress on an individual level, you get closer to the center of power, but the center of power only wants progress in certain forums which might not be aligned to your values. Because in progress and in innovation and in pushing forward, a lot of the power cores don't want, as I said, to protect those who are damaged and endangered by it. But they're also unwilling to make the requisite changes to enable protected progress, and will actively push back in all the aforementioned ways to avoid making change, to question your morals, to question your loyalty, to question your integrity, to question your ambition, to question your vision, to question your values. And all of those things become a bigger story, a bigger part of how we define ourselves as individuals, how we define ourselves in the context of other people and how we interact with them, but also how we define ourselves as value-driven people. Is it selective values? Is it selective progress and selective pushback? Or is it something that we are resolute and stand in because we have determined that this is who we are, this is how we see progress, this is how we would like progress to uplift others. But then also, this is where our lines are as to what is deemed, let's say, appropriate pushback, and pushback that can sometimes help develop ideas. Or is this something that is trying to fully and completely undermine the progress that I'm trying to make or you're trying to make? Because I think that is the nature of also architecting change. It's almost understanding, like, where is the heat source in this house? Is it there and it's going to keep me warm, or is it there to burn me? Like, where is it? And architecting change also means taking a step back to understand, like we talked about the hidden architecture of money last week. It's always about taking that bird's eye view, seeing if you have clarity. Is there anything in the planning that doesn't make sense to you? Is there anything in the planning that feels too distant? And it's not that we can always expect to get answers for everything that we face in terms of pushback, but it doesn't stop us from asking the question. And it also doesn't stop us from seeking out those answers. Because I've realized that everything is I'm not going to necessarily call it a circle, but everything is a system. Everything is a system, and every system has an endpoint, right? But the endpoint doesn't mean it's over forever. It can be a point of evolution. The end is the start of something new. The end of a system is the start of a new one. And sometimes the end of the pushback is the end of phase 1, but is the beginning of phase 2. And I think that when I think about pushback now on an individual level, and I like this word in its original sense, which is resilient, the ability to weather storms, as it were, weather bad times. And I think when you are pushing for progress, I think as an individual, it's cultivating resilience and also self-protection. And for me, those two things are very different. Resilience is the ability to, face the storm and still be standing. But there's the element of self-protection that I think is more along the lines of making sure you don't just repair yourself, but that you've also put up a barrier, as it were, to be resilient. Like you put up a barrier in order to enable your resilience. So it's almost like you have your house, you've painted it with the anti-rain stuff, but maybe you also have, I don't know, like a wall can't protect you, but you know where I'm going with this. It's that extra layer that ensures that you are not just surviving and just taking all the hits, but you're also protected. It's not just I'm going to open myself up. I think about, maybe like something in boxing, you keep your arms up high. You don't just let someone come and slap you in the face. Because I think without that, the two of resilience and self-protection, I think it doesn't avoid the fatigue. It doesn't avoid the infuriation. It doesn't avoid being disheartened. But what it does do is that it helps you to be able not just to live another day and be like, oh, hey, I got through that storm, but also live well for another day. To be able to hibernate in peace while you potentially repair the damage that's been done. And I think that as we see more challenges to progress, and we'll continue to see more challenges to progress, it becomes even more important for us to understand what are our individual and our collective weaknesses, which comes from having conversations. What is our organizational weakness? What is our organization really ready to do to admit its weaknesses? And are you really ready to progress? Are you really ready to, and when I say progress and fight for progress, that's in whichever way makes sense for you, right? This is not I always say to people, like, everyone has their own way to push forward for progress, and it should by no means be determined by what somebody else thinks you should be doing, nor by what you've seen other people do. It should like wholly and solely come from you. If someone said, what is your way to push for progress? This is part of my way. By sitting here talking about the architecture of change, to sit here and say, these are the conversations that I think we should be having more of. It's not necessarily that I have all the answers, because I don't. As I said, this podcast is around deconstructing systems and designing solutions. And you can't design solutions alone. I don't know it all. I don't wish to know it all. But it's about kind of making that judgment and when I say judgment, making that judgment call that I felt was a good idea for me to start to push the boundaries on the conversations that I think that we need to be having as the world becomes more polarized and as we become more distracted by the conversations around progress. or the conversation, we're more distracted by the conversations around pushback that takes our, not just our eyes off the progress, but it doesn't allow us to recognize how far we've truly come. And even if it's not as far as we would like to be, but also it distracts us from continuing to push forward in the ways that are meaningful, um, important, and in many cases, inspiring to and for us. So I'm hoping that this episode today, when we think about kind of progress and pushback and this inevitable dance, I'm hoping that it's made you think about pushback a little bit differently in terms of its focus and its purpose, but that it also kind of gives you a different way to engage with it, whether it's you're managing a team, or you're responsible for budget planning, or you're even responsible for, not even you're responsible for managing your own career, but you're kind of in negotiation phase, you're in comp phase. I'm hoping that it's making you think about protectionary measures. I'm hoping it's making you think about plan Bs, plan C, plan As, plan B. No, plan A is the original plan. Yeah, plan Bs, plan Cs, plan Ds, etc. I hope it makes you think about having these conversations a lot more. And when I say a lot more, just around the different types of pushback you're seeing. And that there's a certain element of reframing how you interact with pushback that comes in its varying forms. Because that's what I really think about, is that sometimes the distractions of what we see make us believe that progress isn't happening, when actually progress is still happening, but it's a very carefully constructed narrative that has been created for us to spend and give more energy to pushback than we do to progress. And if there's nothing else that you take away from today, I just want to remind everybody that pushback is a sign that progress is happening, that there has been effective change, that this effective change is and has been scary enough to require that pushback is happening. So I'm not going to say like actively go out there looking for pushback, etc. No, that's not the messaging. But the messaging is just remember that if there is no change happening, then there would be nothing to push back against. So thank you for taking the time to listen to another episode of Architecture of Change. And I hope you're enjoying it. And please, as they say, please sign up, subscribe, like it, comment, give feedback, because I think this is a message that, this is a conversation starter that I'm hoping reaches more people, to keep these ideas front and center in mind. So wishing you a wonderful Friday, and thank you very much for taking the time. Bye-bye.